those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Mary, Queen of Apostles, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. And Lee will introduce the first speaker.
Thank you, Farcollo. Is that okay at the back, Stephen? Yep. So our first scheduled speaker, Rose Royal, has had to send her apologies as her father-in-law died in the Netherlands, so we might keep all of them in our prayers. And so a big thanks to Fintan Duffy of DHP Architects, who's agreed to stand into the breach in Rose's absence. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Fintan, a highly accomplished architect and a leading figure in the field of conservation. He is the founding director of DHP Architects, based here in Catherine Street in Waterford. Fintan's career spans decades of expertise, beginning with his graduation from the UCD School of Architecture in 1985. Following this, he spent 10 formative years working with some of the most renowned architects in Paris, honing his craft on an international level. After returning to Ireland, Fintan pursued further specialisation by completing a master's degree in urban and building conservation. Today he holds the distinguished title of Grade 1 Conservation Architect, accredited by the Royal Institute of Architects. Fintan also played an instrumental role in developing the School of Architecture at Seto University here in Waterford, and has published extensively on topics such as building repurposing and conservation. And today we're fortunate to have Fintan share his insights on a topic that is both timely and essential. That is, understanding the criteria applied to heritage funding projects for our churches. So please join me in welcoming Fintan Duffy.
Thank you, Lee. I'll be, after that amazing introduction, I'm here today by default. In a way, I was invited to the conference, so I was delighted to attend, and then I got a call yesterday from Lee to say that Rose Ryle, the conservation officer with Waterford County Council, wasn't able to attend. So he asked me to speak on her behalf, and I said I won't speak on her behalf, but I can certainly speak in terms of our experience in this field of conservation, particularly the care of our historic churches, and also how you go about getting the resources to do that from the grant, the funding system that's in place. So if I'm going to be overlapping with some of the later speakers, forgive me. As I said, I didn't see I didn't know it was going to be dealt with in advance. So I'll try and be as brief as I can on this section, and then obviously I hope to be able to answer some of your questions and so on afterwards, if there are questions that relate to practice in that sense. So the first port of call, obviously, is to know what's available, and we have two schemes. We have the Built Heritage Investment Scheme, the BHIS as it's called, which applies to any protected structures in the country. So it's very important that, first of all, that certainly from my point of view, we're talking about protected structures here. So it has to be on the record of protected structures. That's what the definition of protected structure is. So if your building is not on the record of protected structures, which is usually an annex to the development plan of the council or the city council or the county council, then it doesn't apply. But I think in most cases, for nearly all the churches that I'm aware of in the country are on the list, are on the local RPS. So the RPS is a function of the local authority, and you'll be addressing yourselves to the local authorities for these schemes, and that's your first port of call. So I'm assuming that everybody is in that situation. The other source of funding is the Historic Structures Fund, and that is that was an adjunct to the BHIS that I just mentioned. The BHIS being the Built Heritage Investment Scheme, which replaced the old conservation grant scheme. And then the HSF was a way of essentially getting more money for these projects. So the funding is a lot larger with the HSF, and so also are the demands for the application. You know, you have to have a more detailed approach. But in both cases, the principles for applying are kind of similar in terms of the documentation that's required, and I have some I have a slide on that in a moment. So the BHIS then, which is the smaller, let's say, of the two funds, it covers works from €2,500 to €50,000 in value, and it's a matching fund. They're both matching fund schemes. So in other words, and traditionally it was a 50% matching fund scheme. So let's say you wanted to get a roof redone, or and you know you were looking at a bill for €50,000. Well, then you would apply for, you would submit your costs for that, and if you were successful, you would get €25,000 of that 50,000 cost. Now, with the HSF in particular, where the amounts are up to 200,000, so with the HSF it goes from 50k to 200,000. You can apply for an 80% grant in that case. So in other words, you put up 20% of the cost in the case of the HSF. Now, I believe they're changing that as well for the BHIS, but traditionally you're expected to pay a little bit more at the BHIS because the sums are smaller. So those are the two main source of funding. Now, there's a third one which doesn't apply directly to churches unless there's an archaeological issue involved, and that would be the Community Monuments Fund, but I don't know of it being used for any active place of worship to date. It's a relatively new one, and it's usually local community groups, and it usually has an archaeological requirement. So the BHIS, which, as I said, used to be the Conservation Grant Scheme, as its title suggests, the Built Heritage Investment Scheme, there is an emphasis there on, or there was at least, because this originated during the lean years of the recession about 10 years ago. It was essentially, it was seen as kind of a community employment scheme as well, and I think this is an important aspect of the, in your applications, that these are, they're aimed at community efforts around the conservation of these very important monuments, the churches in particular. So your application then, should reflect that in some way. So, and you'll see from the list of works when I show you in a moment, the works that do apply and the works that don't apply, more importantly, the kind of where that emphasis lies. The starting point for all of this kind of effort, if you like, to make the application is a knowledge of the site. That's the starting point. In conservation terms, that's a very important principle. And the knowledge of the site is essentially, it's twofold, because again, in conservation we talk about tangible and intangible qualities of place and so on. And you need to cover both of those in your study. So there is a certain amount of preparatory work to be done. And that preparatory work starts with a site survey, not just a topographical survey with levels, but a survey of the buildings, or the building that you're applying for the grant on. And that is a measured survey. So you have, at the end of that process, you have a set of drawings, you have a photographic record of the current, what we say in conservation terms, the current state of the place. In other words, if it were to be, God forbid, destroyed in a fire tomorrow, you have a complete record of everything that was there. You have the interior photos, you have your planned sections, elevations. It could theoretically be reconstructed based on that information. But it's not just for historical purposes that you need that, it's also so that you can start quantifying any works that you need to get done, and you can't just point out to a builder where you want the roof fixed or where you want the walls damp-proofed or whatever. You have to be able to show on a drawing, you have to be able to measure it, you have to be able to give areas and so on that can be priced, and that's not just for the department, but it's for your own sake, so that you can, that you can manage this process, and not just manage it in the immediate, for this year's grant, but manage it in the longer term, because as you are all custodians of these places, and you have obligations under the Planning and Development Act. You are literally responsible under the Act for the upkeep of these as the owner-occupiers of these protected structures. So you have responsibilities under the Act not to allow them to become endangered. That's the term that they use. It sounds very scary, but it's not really, but it does give the local authority certain powers. For example, they could come in and force you to do the work if they think that you're not paying enough attention to your roof or whatever, and so on. Anyway, that's just the darker side of the legislation, but in most cases people are very happy, and obviously the communities are very invested in these places. So that's that is the kind of the background in terms of getting to know the site. And as I said, there's a physical aspect to getting to know the site, which is your survey drawings and your photographic record. And then that translates into a conditions report, which can be a big, thick document that, depending on how bad the circumstances are, as to where the defects are currently in the structure. So typically there might be a few slates missing from the roof. There might be some blocked down pipes that are causing a leak into the wall. There might be some damp in the floors in places. There might be rain getting in through the stained glass windows. All of those kinds of things, they have to be recorded. You need to know all of that. You need to know what is wrong with the fabric as it exists. And we use the term fabric, either historic fabric, just fabric, for all of the structure and the materials of the place itself. And those are the tangible or the physical aspects of your study. The intangible ones are the place's history, its evolution over time, and at the end of that study, again, which is a parallel but equally important part of getting to know your site, at the end of that process, you should be in a position, or your professional advisor, to be able to tell you why the place, your place, and that's the term that's used in the Borough Charter to describe a site, why it is important, why it's significant. And the Planning Act talks about the significance of the protected structure. There are qualities of interest like architectural, artistic, scientific, historic, and so on. There are 8 different qualities of interest in the Planning Act, and you need to be able to describe that to somebody, in order for you to show that you fully appreciate the importance of your site. Typically, a church would be architectural, artistic, and historic importance, but it would also be of social importance, because that's another one of the qualities of interest. Because of the investment of the local community in that place over time, over so many hundreds of years and so on. That's. I think it's important for me to say that I see that as being of equal importance to the physical aspects of what you're trying to conserve, because there has been an investment by people in this place over a long time, and that has to be acknowledged and recognised, as well as the quality of the craft and the construction that went into this place initially, and of whatever interventions in the meantime that have kept it going over time. So I suppose to summarise what I'm saying is that your study of place is a report that contains a number of chapters, if you like. One of them is the survey information, so it's a set of drawings and it's a photographic record of the site. Then there is a conditions report where your professionals, advisors have appraised the defects and listed them all, so now you know literally what you're going to have to apply for under the grant. And then in parallel with that is the conservation report with its historic summary of the site, culminating in the statement of significance that tells you why the site is important. And then after that, nobody can argue with you when you go looking for money, because you can say, look, we have, here's what needs to be done, and here's why we need to do it, to keep this place going over time for another 200 years or whatever. And then the other thing about the conditions report is there's going to be a long list of things usually in the conditions report. The most urgent ones will be starting at the top. You have to, if the roof is defective, you've only got, it's only a matter of time before the building either falls apart or you're going to have invest a huge amount of money to bring it back to its current state. So you prioritize the works. The roof first, rainwater goods next, the gutters, the downpipes and so on. Windows would be next. In the longer term, if you have problems with your walls, because maybe the wrong renders were used in the 60s or 70s or whatever, and the walls are now sweating on the inside and they're damp and there's cracks in the plaster and all that kind of thing, that is obviously, it's on the wish list, but it's maybe not the most urgent work. Again, I'm just talking from general experience here, every site is different. But you do need to prioritize, because you're going to have to put figures after each one of these items that are real costs, and that is the basis then for your application and for the money that you're looking for from the department. This is an example, and I just checked with Margaret and Mary here from Tallow that it's okay to show these drawings. This is Tallow Church that we're working on with them. And this is a typical kind of survey. So before we started, there was no survey of Tallow Church. Now we have a full set of drawings. And those drawings, as you can see, you can dimension, they're obviously scale drawings. You can dimension things off them. You can measure floor areas, wall areas. You can use it. You can develop your specifications around these. You can identify where all the defects are, as you can see here on this, in this particular instance. You can, and again, when you go to the department with your homework done, so to speak, it makes it very difficult for them to refuse, at some level. And the other thing I would say is that there's a lot of competition now around these grants, and that's only to be expected, because they are, we're one of the few countries in Europe actually that provides assistance of this nature, and in such in relative terms it's a very generous system of it's very generous percentages. So you'll be in competition with other churches, with other communities and so on, and the department won't have money to pay everybody what they want. So they'll prioritise the ones who are the best prepared and who have their homework done to the highest standards and so on. So it's really important to get this stage of it done. But as I say, even if you don't get a penny from the department after this stage, you still have a very, very important set of documents that are necessary for you as the custodians of this site to manage the site going forward. You really do need this level of knowledge of the site. This is again would be a typical conditions report. So it starts off with the little with usually the NIH survey, because again, most of your churches would have been surveyed by the NIH. Now, the NIH survey is not the same as protected structure status. The NIH will just do their surveys, but anything that's on the survey is potentially a protected structure, because the local authority is supposed to take the NIH surveys, and they're supposed to take everything on the survey in their region that is given a rating of regional importance or more, and they're all regional importance at least, and put them on their RPS. So if your building is on the NIH survey and it's not on the RPS, it may be in your interest to ask the local authority to put it on the RPS, because then you will have access to the funding, to the grants. You won't have access if it's just on the NIH. Okay. So again, the history and evolution of the site is kind of a standard. There's a standard way of looking at this. It's not very. It doesn't have to be very, very involved research, but it's great how much you can find locally and how much interest there is, and how in most places there's already a good local archive on the history, and that's absolutely great because it can be quickly translated into a compilation report, summary of the evolution and so on, and then the statement of significance. So you can see that in this case, Tallow Church has been given importance under architectural, artistic, historic, social, and technical. So that's 5 out of the 8. That's pretty important. And the technical was particularly the timber roof, which is an incredible structure, very, very unusual. So even the roof spaces need to be inspected, and you'll find all sorts of really interesting things in the thorough search. So just very quickly then, under the BHIS application, there's a checklist here for the BHIS, and you can see that you have to know how much money you're looking for essentially, and you have to justify that. You have to be able to say how much matching expenditure you're going to provide for the amount that you're looking for, and then whether you have other funding or not. Now at the moment they're allowing you to, they used them to before, but you're allowed to apply under both the BHIS and the HSF, and whichever one you get, you could use. Obviously you won't get both, but you get one or the other. Or if you get both, offered both, you take the larger of the two, obviously. They talk about method statements. Now again, the method statement would be covered in the conditions report. That's a more technical kind of thing, but any works that you're proposing, you will need to give some detail on. But as I say, that's something that I don't want to go into too much detail now, because that's really is for the professional advisors. The qualifying and non-qualifying works then, and the general rule of thumb is that they are only conservation works to the external envelope of the building. And conservation works, the best definition I have is works that don't require the addition of a new material. That's kind of one of the definitions. So in other words, you're fixing things, you're unblocking gutters. Well, you may have to put in a slate or two, but you're not replacing the roof. Although in some cases conservation works may include replacement of the roof. But again, you will be proposing that on the basis of a study that you've done that says these slates that are now 250 years old are leaking everywhere. They've exfoliated to the extent that if we take them off and try and reuse them, we're going to lose more than 50% of the slate, so therefore we're proposing a new slate. It's those kinds of arguments that you need to be able to make in relation to what you're asking for. The repair or replacement of rainwater goods is covered. The works to repair external walls is covered, and they're particularly anxious, and rightly so, to replace bad renders. And bad renders are renders that are very cementitious, that have a lot of cement in them. They were very popular even from the late Victorian period, when they rediscovered Portland cement and they thought this is an amazing material. We slap it on, it keeps the rain out and so on. The problem is it is very impervious to rainwater, but it's also very inflexible material. And when you put it on an old single leaf stone wall, masonry wall, that was built with lots of little individual pieces of stone bedded in line, which has a lot of flexibility built into it, tiny little micro movements all the time. The cement very, very quickly cracks the cement render. The water gets in through the cracks, through micro fissures. It soaks into the wall, and even when the sun comes out, it can't all get out again through those cracks. So the walls get wetter and wetter and wetter over time without those kind of renders. So again, that would be something that would be identified in your conditions report, and it would be again a priority over time to replace those. And they can equally have done on the inside of the church as well. I've seen them on both sides of the walls, but they are a big issue. And they are, and the grant thankfully allows for their replacement. So repairs to external joinery, repairs to stained glass windows, obviously, repair and conservation of external fixtures, and in this case, I did say the external envelope, but they will allow internal structure and features which are structural, such as floors, staircases, partitions, and they will also allow, in some cases, for organs as well. So the non-qualifying works. So routine maintenance and minor repairs, you're supposed to be doing those yourselves, so they're not supposed to be covered. Alterations and improvements, like you want an extension, so that's not covered. Demolitions are not covered because protected structure, even to put in a new door opening somewhere. Conjectural restoration and reconstruction. So again, this is a bugbear of conservationists. You know, sometimes people, you'll see they hack off the plaster on the walls of their old house, and they think that this makes it look very 18th century or something, but in fact in the 18th century they knew that if you didn't plaster the walls properly, the walls would get damp, so they put a render for a reason on the outside of the walls. So that would be, you know, taking off something like that because you think it might have been like that, that's what they're referring to. Or if you were to kind of do a new metal railing around the graveyard or something, and it was, you know, overly ornate or something, not based on any historical evidence, that would be conjectural restoration. So in other words, again, in conservation we talk about, you know, reconstruction or restoration is only applicable when you have evidence. So it's what's called a known earlier state of it, and that's often, you might find it in photos, you might find it on maps and so on, but you won't, rarely will you get it right by making it up. So anyway, those, again, I'm just drawing your attention to these lists. They exist, they're in the literature under that on both of these sites. And you know, again, your professional advisors, and I'm assuming that, you know, you will have somebody advising you will know about this. And these are, again, part of the checklist of things that you make sure that when you're applying for the grant that it comes in under these categories. So that's all I have to say for the moment. Sorry about the rather unstructured nature of it, but as I said, I just thought I'd try and I just talk about it from, you know, what Rose might have said, which you didn't hear, but this from the local authorities' point of view as to what applies and doesn't apply.
Anybody wants to ask a question?
Just one question. Can we get a copy of the slides?
Yes, certainly. We actually have this session recorded, so we'll be sending an email out to all the participants with the video of the conference. That's okay?
I think the first one to call on this is just to go to the website. If you type in DHIS Department of Heritage, it will come up and you go directly to that document. And if you type in HSS Department of Heritage, you'll direct you to those documents.
Councillor Liam Frazen there.
Yeah. Okay, I see the bill characters granted gone from about 15,000 to 50,000. But that's only funded by 50% at the moment there.
Yeah.
Does that cover, how much more work does that cover than it did before? And secondly, on about the HSF fund, that's 100,000. And there's
Up to 200.
up to 200,000.
Yeah.
And you have to fund 20% yourself.
Yeah.
So just wondering there, like all these reports must be done to get that grant. Like how much of the money will be gone on the reports to get the grant? The last question, didn't you? You said there that damp churches and flaking walls on churches wouldn't be a priority. Like I think this is a priority as well, and I think that should come under the grant as well, because look, we need to keep our churches warm. To get people into church at the moment is not easy, but if we have damp churches there, I think it's important to keep them right and keep the people coming in. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes. Well, I suppose on the question of the funding, yeah, they'll pay a maximum of 80% of the cost, up to 200,000 on the HSF. Now, with the competition, particularly the HSF, because they might only be granting 2 or 3 of those for the county any given year, you may not get your 200. You might get 170, and then you'll have to put up the rest yourselves, but you'll still get a substantial. So you don't know in advance. There's no guarantee as to what between 50 and 80% you'll get. Just to be aware of that. Yeah. So, but what I think what I was saying earlier about prioritising the work, but also itemising the work. So if, let's say, 80,000 of that is your roof, and 50,000 of that is the renders on your walls, but you can only afford to do the roof this year. Do the roof first, and then go back the following year for the rest of it. And then that also, they like to see that because they can see that people are, serious about carrying it through. Yeah.
Just the other question, what would a typical site survey cost to produce a document?
Well, the survey itself, it can vary. Again, I don't want to sound smart, but it is how long is a piece of string, because if it's the Cathedral of Waterford or if it's a small parish church somewhere else, but you get a surveyor in. There are local firms that do it from maybe from €1,000 to €2,500 or something to do the whole site, and then you might be looking at that figure again for your conservation report and your conditions report, for example. And then if there are structural issues, you might have to get a structural engineer to do a report, but that will usually come out in the conditions report. So it's difficult to know, but it's going to be a relatively small figure compared to what you're applying for. But as I say, even if you don't get anything, I think every group should be looking to get that done anyway, to fund that and have those documents, because it gives you a lot of control over how you manage the site. Yes. Sorry.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Just a basic question. You said most of the churches are in the protected list.
Yes.
I am chaplain in Atkin Hospital,
Yeah.
and we have a chapel there built in 1953.
Yes.
So how do I find out if it's in the list, or what is the criteria?
You just have to go to the RPS. You go to the development plan for Waterford City and County Council, and there's usually appendices at the end of it, and one of them is usually called Heritage. I can't remember what it is at the moment for Waterford. And you go in there, there's usually a document called the Record of Protected Structures, and you just look up under your address. It's usually by address. If it's not on it, you should check the NIAH, the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, which is actually a really interesting website if you want to check it out. So it's www.niah.ie, and they've a record of, if it's recorded on that and it's not on the RPS, you could go to the council and say, we would like our building to be added to the RPS. Now, the hospital, I'm not sure, I don't know the chapel in Ardkeen, but certainly there is a historic interest to that development phase of the hospital because it was under the Dr. Noel Brown kind of rollout of the anti-TB measures and so on in the 40s and 50s, and there's still some of those left, and I don't think they're protected, but I think they should be protected, and they may be on the NIH. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Sorry, there was this gentleman.
Probably worth saying, just going back to the point of the report, one of the criteria for the grant you mentioned is how well prepared the application and how credible it is.
Yes, yeah.
And to me, it would, if you didn't have the survey done, you'd be because you know the form of the first survey.
Yeah, I would agree.
While it's an expense, it's very necessary.
Yeah.
But it's important to say it's an expense that could be covered by the diocese as well, because that's something that the Bishop was going to announce as well today. That there is a certain funding there from a bequest for the maintenance of churches. And so that is available to all parishes to cover any surveys and reports that get the funding application started.
So there's another question over here.
It's straightforward enough. It's just that the protected structure would be classed as the building itself, the church itself. But the perimeter walls and say the wrought iron work around, say, various gates and things like that, that would be replaced or kind of rebuilding of the perimeter walls. Would that be covered by the grant?
Yes. The definition of the protected structure site is, and they use the term, it's a very strange word, but they use the term curtilage as the boundary. So anything within the curtilage, including the curtilage, is protected. So that's your boundary wall, the railings, the gates leading in. If there's a graveyard around it, everything in the graveyard is protected. So the site, everything within the red line boundary around your site is protected. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, Vincent, thanks for your presentation. I know it's be easier to maybe hear me or more importantly understand me. But I think we're at a real pinch point here, and everybody in this room are facing probably the same challenge. And the challenge is that, look, we have very low numbers attending Mass, right? Each parish and I represent, I'm chair of the Ballyduff Church in Meaden. And we have a lot of work to do. But from what I see from the Built Heritage Investment Structure Fund and even from the Historic Structure Fund, it's not going to take us over the line. And where, people I've been moving, and we need to do work, say, in my parish. And I've been moving the idea that we're going to do it, we're going to try and get some of these grants. But to get the people to row in behind that, to come behind us and to fund it, people are asking questions like, look, what's happening in Rome? The Catholic Church itself is a well-off institute. Why can't this be funded? Now I know, and I know myself, that is not practical, that is not possible. But I think we need to approach what is on offer and through the grants and that. And I think we're all kind of working in isolation. And every parish, I think, is kind of working in isolation when it comes to try and establish, to try and get funding, to try and bring our churches up to a standard. And I think we need probably an approach, a collective approach of what can we do in a unified sense, because I think we're all isolated. And I suppose just something in relation to the conservation area of churches and that. Can we or will we be able to afford to continue the conservation measures that is laid out by, say, planning laws and that to continue? Because conservation work is way, way more expensive than any ordinary works. And I know it's something that I wouldn't want in St. Nicholas Church in Ballyduff either, but are we being pushed into a time where we might just have to do repairs? The conservation end of it may have to take a back seat, even though I wouldn't like that to happen, but that we want to be forced into that. So I'm just saying that it's great to see the number of people here today, but I think for all of us to walk out the door and not come back in a kind of a collective mode into the future will leave all our churches throughout the diocese in a very vulnerable state. Thanks.
I mean, just to pick up on one point there, the cheapest thing that you can do is maintenance. So if everybody maintained all the time and had been doing so since the buildings were built, and if there wasn't, if let's say some wrong materials hadn't been introduced over time, and that was no fault at the time, it was well intentioned and so on, then in most cases these buildings would have an indefinite lifespan because they're very simply built. There's very little that can go wrong, unlike modern construction with its layers and layers of things and its technology and so on. They're very, very simple. The technology is quite straightforward, and all they need is maintenance, essentially. So I think the aim should be to get to get the defects, the major defects addressed as soon as you can, and get to a stage where you now just have to maintain it, but have a system for maintaining it. The Church of England in the 1880s developed a system called the quinquennial inspection report, where it's a 5-year maintenance program with different checklists of different things to be done: daily care, weekly care, monthly, biannually, every year, every 5 years. It's all listed, the kind of things you need to inspect and so on, how you do it. And something like that is required. If you're to keep these places going cost effectively and with as little effort as possible. But it does require, stewardship and somebody taking responsibility and having those systems in place, and a little budget every year. It does, there should be money put aside, but it's a small amount if it's done in that way.
It was just a point that the gentleman over here made. I know it's something to keep in mind from my experience of applying for grants. What they may come back and ask you is, can we see your governance, your policy document? Please include that, because they're saying to themselves, we're going to give public money to this crowd, so we want to be absolutely sure that it's going to be used in the proper way. So not be run around the last minute and say, ooh, let's tidy this up or tidy that up. But if you're asked to have your government's policy document, to have that ready, because they need to be sure that you can manage, that you're a group that can manage finance, that you can manage people, that you can manage a building. Sometimes that's forgotten. It's coming in more and more. We have to produce a policy document.
Okay, well, I mean, I can imagine that for a large-scale state investment or something by another body, but it's not on the checklist for what you're required to do under these funds here. But your best management document, as I said, is the survey drawings and the conditions report, and having that to show people.
So will we take one more question? Somebody?
Just to ask, are those grants means tested?
No.
Okay, so we take a 5-minute break before we start again, just if anyone wants to stretch their legs.